Welcome to Murder May, and I want to start this out with a series I recently watched and I fell in love with, and that is Hannibal. This is going to be the month that's going to be the hardest to not go into spoilers with, so this will have spoilers in it later on. I'll try to talk about it without going into spoilers. This month is going to be the worst month for that because you really can't talk about a murder mystery without talking about who did it. So without further ado, let's jump in to my review of season 1, 2, and 3 of Hannibal. For anyone who doesn't know what this is, the show follows a criminal profiler called Will Graham, and he has this special ability to get into the minds of killers. He can really think through, and he I'm not Will Graham anymore. I am now this killer. How would I do this? And he's able to solve all these crimes because of that. But as he's starting to solve these crimes, they decide getting put into the mind of a killer can be a very dangerous thing. They decide to have him get a psychiatrist to help him to make sure he doesn't go overboard. And so they make him befriend a psychologist called Hannibal Lecter. Dr. Hannibal Lecter, for the most part, seems like he's a very interesting guy, but he seems a good person, but he's holding a dark secret. Hannibal is a cannibal, a serial killer known as the Chesapeake Ripper. And he's able to hide this for years and years on end without anyone figuring it out. So that's a kind of a spoiler, but going into the series, and this is something I almost have a problem with, is going into the series, before you even meet Hannibal as a doctor, you meet him as a killer. You see him eating a human liver. And it's like, okay, I would have preferred if it was, you meet him as a psychiatrist, and then at the end of the episode, like the big cliffhanger at the end of the pilot, is the last shot is you see him eating someone. It's like, that would have made it, in my mind, that would have made it 10 times better. But I also see where they're coming from, where like, you already saw who this is a killer. Now, when you meet him as someone who's not a killer, you're like, no, that guy's a killer, that's the guy who's a killer. And that's a big thing about this series, is they don't hide it. They don't try to make it sort of a mystery, which could have been really interesting in a different, in an alternate universe almost, where they made a different version of this series where they really kept it hidden that who the Chesapeake Ripper was, and for the whole series you're like not sure. You don't really get to put those two together until later on. So that's one problem, but also in the same way, this series never really has anything like that. They're straightforward. They're not trying to hide who the killers are. It's less about like this really big surprise of what, that's the killer, and more of just the detectives, the FBI trying to figure out these killers and trying to figure out who they are. So one of the biggest things I really like about this series is the whole premise of psychology and someone who can get into the mind of killers. Because if you guys have been following this channel from its beginning, you would have heard me talk about how when I was, and still to this day sometimes, like when I was like 17, 18, I was obsessed with I was finishing up high school and I would just be doing my schoolwork while listening to true crime podcasts, listening to stories about serial killers and stuff like that. And I love just getting into the mind of the killer and trying to figure out how they work. I love psychology. I love storytelling. And I found that those type of stories were just fascinating to see how they didn't get away with it versus how some of them did get away with it. Quick editor's note. As I just said, I was obsessed with true crime back then, but I said I loved it as a story. I thought it was a really interesting story. Now, as I grow in maturity, something I realized is that I was thinking of it as, oh, this is a really cool story. And now thinking about this, and this is something to keep in mind if you are into true crime too, these are real people's lives who were affected by this. Real people got affected by these crimes, by these killers. Some of those families are still around to this day. And it's always going to be a part of their life that one of their family members were killed by Ted Bundy, by these different killers. And if any of those people actually manage to see this video, I want to apologize for those years of mine just thinking them as another character in a story and not realizing that these are real people. And I encourage you guys, if you guys are doing this, have the same problem as me, do not do that. Because these are real people who have lives and were affected by these real-life killers, and it's not a funny little game. So that's one thing of going into the series I really loved, was because while I'm definitely nothing like Will Graham, I can relate to him a lot because I did do something like that, kind of. I was never good at it because I was never actually solving crimes. I was just listening to other crimes that already got solved and trying to figure out why they did that. So, but I thought that was really interesting, and it made it so that going into the series, I was relating to the main character a lot. And the other thing was, of course, with the psychology, like getting into the mind of killers, but also just getting into I loved how it was twist. You saw Hannibal twisting Will's mind for the series, and it's like, I'm not a psychiatrist, so I can't really say if it's accurate at all, but I can say, for as a show, I felt like the psychology was like working well, and it was like, oh yeah, this makes sense. And it made sense why it would work that way. This is actually rated PG-13, so in a way I would have said it could have been cooler if it was R-rated, because then you could have shown really like the gruesomeness of it. But for the most part, I felt like it was allowed to be gruesome when it needed to be. And it didn't hold back when it comes to that stuff. With that being said, I'm going to get into some problems I have with it, and also almost I don't have with this. So this is going to get into a little bit more of like spoiler territory when I say this. But so there's a couple problems. I hate how often, again, this is spoilers. So I really recommend you guys, if you guys haven't seen this TV show, check it out. It's worth not spoiling it for yourself because it's really good. I strongly recommend the series for someone who can handle something like that. But yes, into spoilers. I really don't like it how they bring people back too much. In one way, it was nice. Like, some of the people who died, you're like, oh, I didn't want that. Like, that person shouldn't have died there. Like, darn it. But it's just like too many times they brought someone back like, oh, that person died. No, they're back alive. And I think the biggest example of that is with Abigail, because when she was first killed by Hannibal, you're like, oh my goodness, this is terrible. Like, I didn't want her to die. Like she should have enjoyed, like, I wish she had an enjoyable life. I mean, because she had been through a lot and it would have been nice. But it's like, she's dead. But then they bring her back at the end of season 2, only to kill her off in a few minutes. And then they bring her back in the beginning of season 3, only to reveal that she actually did die before that. And so thus, if you want to bring her back, at least I would have preferred if they made it so she stayed alive instead of making it so she immediately died again, because then it just made this reveal at the end of season 2, like, she's alive. No, she's dead again. It's like, okay, why did you just do that? You also had a couple other characters who just, like, the one person who got tricked into believing he was the Chesapeake Ripper, got killed multiple times, and kept coming back to life. Now, I do like how he ended up dying, because it was brutal in the most disturbing way, but there's a part of me that would have preferred if, after Will shot him, he died. In my mind, I appreciated, and I found it really, like, disturbingly a great ending to him later on when he was eating himself, practically, as Hannibal was feeding him parts of his own body. But it didn't need to happen that way. It could have just had it so he died there. And the secret of Hannibal being the Chesapeake Ripper just died with him. And he's like, he figured out who the Chesapeake Ripper was. Then suddenly he's dead and he can't tell anyone. Instead of making it so he stayed alive and just refused to tell anyone. It's like, okay, you should have just killed him off there. Another example was the person in charge of the psych ward. They kept killing him off and then bringing him back. And I think he actually ended up being alive at the end of the series. But it's like, so you had it so he got shot, he got framed for being the Chesapeake Ripper and got shot by a FBI agent. Oh, so he died there. That would have been the perfect ending. No, he's alive again. Then I'm pretty sure he got captured by Hannibal once, but then he survived that. But then, he got captured by the Red Dragon, got lit on fire and all, but somehow he survived that. And by the end of the series, he was still alive. And I'm like, just kill off this character. It would have been 10 times better if they had just killed him off with the FBI agent, because then it would have made it such a brutal way of, he was innocent, framed for this, and then he got killed because of it. It's like, that would have been 10 times better. They should have done that. But they didn't. I mean, the only one in my mind that actually, wow, I wanted this person dead, because I didn't really like this person, was the reporter who got killed off and then actually was not killed off, but I thought it was a really great way of doing it, because it was a way of tricking Hannibal into thinking, oh, Will is being turned into a killer, I should trust him more and more. And I thought that was like, okay, yeah, I could see why that works. Then it led us to believe that she was actually killed, but no, he was tricking Hannibal this whole time, but he had to make it believable, so he did all the stunts to make it look like he was. The other big thing that I'm on the fence about is how Hannibal actually gets captured in the end. Because in one way, it would have been nice to just have it so he got captured. He actually lost. But in another way, I kind of do like it how they made it so he turned himself in. So it was almost a power move on his part of, oh, guess what? Will was like, I don't care to capture you anymore. I don't care to know where you're at all times. Like, I don't care anymore. And then Hannibal's like, oh, okay. Then I'm going to on purpose allow myself to get captured, turn myself in so that for the rest of your life, you'll always know where I'm at. Like, it was a power move on his point, but also in the same point, it could have been Will just, like, having the last straw, because he kind of tricked him into turning himself in, so, like, there's a bunch of I have mixed feelings about that, because, again, in one way, it felt like a defeat on the good guy's part, and the other way, I kind of liked that, because then I didn't feel like, yes, he's finally put away. I feel like he has something up his sleeve there, and I don't trust that. So, yeah, again, I have mixed feelings. Like, there's a part of me that would have preferred if it was like, for all his power, he finally got caught, and Hannibal was put away. It's like this victory for them, but instead it's not. Another thing on that is I don't like it how you don't see his trial, you don't see any of that. It just cuts to, oh yeah, years later, like, I think it was like 3 years later. Yeah, he's in prison now. He managed to convince people he was insane. You built up 3 seasons to this trial. Like, I would have liked to see that, but instead they didn't. And I'm like, every other version of the story had references to the trial and had references to when he finally got captured, but actually didn't really see all this. And I would prefer to actually have seen the trial part of this and see the last time Will saw him before he got thrown into the psych ward for the rest of his life. I would also say it would have been better if this was 4 seasons, because then you could have made it so the 3rd season ended with him going to prison, and then the 4th season picks up years later, and then it would felt more like Will was coming back after years, and people were just seeing him after years of this, and like, oh, you're back. But instead it was like, one episode you see him get captured, the next episode is like, oh yeah, this all happened, and 3 years later, Will comes back. It's like, you know what I'm saying? It's like, I would have preferred not if that was not the case. I wish it was a 4th season, just because based off the ending. Like, I get it, it's a very popular thing in murder mysteries and just stuff like that, and I have to admit, I don't want to go into too much spoilers on this, but I have to admit, I have some books I plan to write with has more, you figure out who the killer is in the end, but the killer gets away with it. That is a thing that happens. But I don't know, I would have preferred if the series ended with him in prison, and like, yes, a victory for the good guys. Hannibal's put away, but instead it was like, he probably didn't survive off that cliff, but I don't know. He might have survived it somehow, him and Will, and what's going to happen next? Are they going to have to recapture him? Like, is he going to spend the rest of his life outside of prison? Like, the book Hannibal has it so like, at the end, he just lives the rest of his life outside of prison. Like, but that was like after he was captured. One of the biggest problems is, as you start the series, you have this idea of like, okay, so this is going to follow up to the story, and this is really going to be a prequel to the story of the Red Dragon and Silence of the Lambs and stuff like that. Like, you're going to be able to, like, you don't even have to see those to know, okay, this is the character that's leading up to that. We're going to, when you watch Silence of the Lambs, you know that this was what happened before that. But instead, they like have it so, they make a reference that I think is really interesting to like try to justify this with like, in another universe, this could have been different. That could have been, that I felt like that was a way of them saying like, yeah, basically, I know this is a completely different story than what would have happened in the Silence of the Lamb universe. It's like, because by the end of the movie, he was outside of prison, and they could have captured him again to put him in prison again for Silence of the Lambs. But based off of what set up, I doubt that if they had a 4th season, he would be back in prison. And so Silence of the Lambs never would have happened the same way, because Hannibal was not in prison for that. And also everything that happened in the sequel book after, well, the 3rd book it would be, the afterwards would not have happened, because that all happened in the beginning of the 3rd season of this show, which at first I was like, I don't like that. I would prefer it if they had it so that all happened after Silence of the Lambs and all. But then the more I thought about it, I'm like, I actually do agree with the idea of having it so Mason Verger got his revenge before he went to prison instead of afterwards. Because then it would make 10 times more sense, because it's like, okay, he was waiting for him to get outside of prison to go capture him again. Like, why would he have waited? If it would make 10 times more sense if he had done it before the FBI had captured him and tried to, kill him by feeding him to these pigs. So I thought that was actually better after I started thinking about it more. Like, but yeah, this series definitely is like everything that happened in the beginning of season 3 were more of a season after Silence of the Lambs. So now there's nothing to go after Silence of the Lambs. So in this universe, if he ever got captured again, I would think it would be better to just say, and yeah, he spent the rest of his life in prison. The other problem with the whole trial thing that I found was really annoying is I would have loved to see how he convinced them that he was insane, because he wasn't insane, and everyone who knew him knew that Hannibal wasn't insane. But making it so that you never saw it was kind of annoying. On the same point, you also have the whole thing with the Manhunter. They have it so Will tells his son that he had spent some time in a psych ward, but it says he said he like willingly went there, and they made it so he went there by force because he was convicted of murdering someone, of being a copycat killer, and which he wasn't. But they have this idea that he was, and I thought it was 10 times better if they just had it so he willingly said, yes, I need to have this break. I need to have this time in this psych ward to figure myself out because of all this chaos I've been through. Instead, they made it so it was more by force, and I felt like that took away some of the power from him on choosing this instead. So overall, guys, I think the acting, the characters are well done. It's a very disturbing story, but in the most part, I found it quite enjoyable. And if you are the type of person who would like something like that, I would strongly recommend checking out if you haven't yet. If you have, tell me your thoughts about this series, because it's beautiful. I loved it. Disturbing in the best ways possible. Would love it if they made a 4th season of this. They probably won't, but I mean, you can always hold out hope that there might be a 4th season. We see more of this disturbing character in his disturbing world. So, with that being said, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys did, leave us a thumbs up. If you guys want to see more videos like this month is going to be all about murder mysteries. Please subscribe.
I don't find you that interesting. You will.
Thank you guys for watching. This has been the Movie Night Reviewer. Peter Wary, signing off.